Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's topic extension about corporate social responsibility. As explained in last week's lecture, corporate social responsibility, from now on referred to as CSR, is the social responsibilities that a company voluntarily takes part in. A key word here is voluntarily, because once a company has to take the responsibility into account because it is obliged by law, it isn't called CSR anymore. However, it was not always this way, because ever since the 1950s there has been a conversation about the company's social responsibility. But it was not until the 1970s that this started to develop in actual results and legislations. As we look at it now, CSR can be divided in two different sides. You have the economic side and the responsibility side. The economic side looks at CSR purely from a business perspective, whereas the responsibility side looks at CSR in a way that a company wants to make the world a better place. To start out in the 1970s, in 1970 the very first Earth Day was celebrated. This was because of a massive oil spill that had happened the year before. This spill, and the recession in the USA at the time, turned out to be the tipping point in the USA. It caused protests all over the country with about 20 million people, 10% of the population more or less, taking to the streets. They had enough of the purely profit-focused companies doing whatever they deemed fit. This caused the US government to implement laws covering the social responsibility of companies towards the population. These laws were not very specific yet, due to the lack of a universally accepted definition of social responsibility. This definition would not come until 1979, when Carroll defined CSR as the social responsibility of business encompasses the economic, legal, ethical, and discretionary expectations that society has of organization at a given point in time. Meanwhile, in Europe and other developed countries, similar developments were taking place due to the growth of the trade union movement and the failure of consumers to purchase goods and services from irresponsible companies. Real development in CSR by companies did not start in the 1970s. It would mainly be speeches by community groups and consumer riots. It did, however, see the rise in popularity of the ideas about social partnership and labor relations. 1980s, era of corporate social performance. In the 1980s, CSR became more legitimized in the US as President Reagan implemented new policies to combat the recession. With these policies, he called upon companies and private initiatives to address social problems while slimming down the amount of laws created to influence the private sector. Alongside these policies, Reagan also issued calls for voluntarism in community initiatives, as he was more interested in funding the private sector to create more jobs than to fund these community initiatives. This decision emphasized that businesses rather than government should be the driving force in social responsibility and growth. The UK also started implementing policies that reduced government interference in the private section. This caused a similar reaction of companies as it did in the United States. They had to answer to different interest groups that still expected that the social expectations would be fulfilled. Due to these changes in regulation of the free market, more and more researchers and experts on the topic of business models started looking into ways to incorporate the need for CSR in their existing business plans. A scholar named Thomas M. Jones suggested that CSR could and should be a decision-making process that influenced the corporate behavior. It was also in this decade that stakeholder management and business ethic became common knowledge for corporations and their management teams. 1990s, theory building. During the 1990s, CSR started to get international appeal. This was partly caused by the increased international operations of multinational corporations. Now, these companies did not only have to take their own business environments into account, but they also had to deal with completely different business environments in every country that they had expanded to. These problems were tackled by using both novel policies as well as proven ones. A lot of well-known theories about CSR were created by experts during this decade due to the high number of different environments that companies needed to consider and the implementation of corporate citizenship. Corporate citizenship is the company's responsibility towards societies with the goal of producing higher standards of living and a higher quality of life for everyone. One of these theories was the 5 dimensions of strategic CSR by Burke and Loxton. It states that there were 5 dimensions for achieving business objectives, and these are centrality, specificity, proactivity, voluntarism, and visibility. They argued that with the implementation of strategic CSR through these 5 dimensions would translate into identifiable and measurable value creation within companies. Another one that was conceived in the 1990s and is still used to this day is the triple bottom line by Elkington. This was first published in 1994 as a sustainability framework and was explained upon in 1998. This theory stated that the way to achieve a perfect triple bottom line performance, which is social, environmental, and economic, was through effective long-term partnerships between the private and public sector, as well as amongst stakeholders. This theory focused on sustainability, which was gaining more and more prevalence during the late 1990s and early 2000s. The last and maybe most famous theory was Carroll's pyramid of corporate social responsibility. Carroll's social responsibility pyramid is a framework that explains how and why organizations should take social responsibility. The pyramid highlights the 4 most important types of responsibility of organizations. These are economic responsibility, legal responsibility, ethical responsibility, and philanthropic responsibility. Economic responsibility of companies is about producing goods and services that society needs and to make a profit on them. Companies have shareholders who expect and demand a reasonable return on their investment. Economic responsibility in CSR is a responsibility to be profitable, and it is the only way for a business to survive and support society in the long term. Legal responsibility of companies is about complying with the minimum rules that have been set. Organizations are expected to operate and function within those rules. These rules determine how organizations can conduct their business practices in a fair manner, as defined by legislators on national, regional, and local level as well. The ethical responsibility of business goes beyond certain laws and regulations. Society expects organizations to conduct and manage their business in an ethical manner. Taking ethical responsibility means that organizations embrace activities or practices that haven't necessarily been written down, but they are still expected. The philanthropic responsibility of business includes voluntary activities and practices of businesses. The nature and quantity of these activities are voluntary and are guided by a company's desire to take part in social activities that are not expected from organizations in an ethical sense. Philanthropic activities give the public the impression that the company wants to give something back to the community. Examples of philanthropy are gifts, donations, volunteer work, or community development. Globalization and the rise of more advanced technology also brought a big opportunity and at the same time threat for companies: the internet. This development made companies even more visible to the general public than they had been before. It would, however, not be until the 2000s that it would really start to affect companies. The start of CSR in the 2000s can be defined by one newly created compact, the United Nations Global Compact, or UNGC. This compact, launched in July of 2000, gathered 44 global companies, 12 civil society organizations, and various business associations to fill the gaps in governance in terms of human rights, social and environmental issues, and to inset values into the global market. Together with this, the European Committee presented a green paper called Promoting a European Framework for Corporate Social Responsibility, which defined the new updated expectations and concerns at the time. This was the first step into the European strategy on CSR. This strategy has been incentivized by the EC through subsidies and other stimuli, and its core could be described as a concept whereby companies integrate social and environmental concerns in their business operations and in their interactions with their stakeholders on a voluntary basis. Meanwhile, organizations were transforming their policies as a response to public interest. This led to a positive social impact and added the environment as a stakeholder for many companies. Now, when changes were made within companies or their way of production, the environment, which are the people, the planet, and other examples, would be considered more often before making a final decision. In the second half of the decade, it was generally accepted that CSR was a strategic necessity and a competitive advantage. In 2006, Porter and Kramer provided a new understanding of CSR, or SCSR as it was now called, by presenting their strategy of looking outside in to the impact of a company would have with decisions. This theory is one that is still widely used when businesses make new strategic decisions. The development of CSR within companies came to a halt when in 2008 the global economic crisis started. However, at the end of this crisis, companies would gain new insights in the demands for CSR by the general public. The 2010s saw two big developments in CSR, the renewed EU strategy for CSR and as well the concept of creating shared value was further developed by Porter and Kramer. The renewed EU strategy for CSR, published in 2011, was eventually followed by the Enterprise 2020 manifesto in 2015. This manifesto aimed to set the direction of businesses in Europe and played a big role in developing an inclusive and sustainable economy for the future. The concept of shared value by Porter and Kramer states that companies can incorporate social or environmental considerations in their strategies and with this gain competitive advantages over their competitors. They suggested that treating societal challenges as business opportunities is the most important new dimension of corporate strategy and at the same time the most powerful path to social progress. Lastly, we would like to talk about the current trends of CSR. CSR has been consistent and stable in its popularity and acceptance, which is mainly due to three driving forces that keep CSR alive and well. These are business acceptance, global growth, and academic proliferation. Business acceptance is the most important factor. Businesses as an institution in society has increasingly accepted the idea that this is a multi-purpose social institution and that its legitimacy in society and the world is tied to public acceptance and approval, particularly in free economies. Within this, there are two trends that have been evident in the past couple of decades: social entrepreneurship and social intrapreneurship. Social entrepreneurship is the process of pursuing solutions to social problems while using time-tested business principles to help achieve total organizational success. Social entrepreneurship may occur in either profit or non-profit organizations. For profit organizations, social entrepreneurs factor in and integrate social objectives in their business missions from the very beginning. These are the firms that seek social mission excellence in addition to financial excellence, and they have taken the lead in advocating causes they consider important. Social intrapreneurship includes firms that did not have a social agenda as part of their initial charter, but later develop a highly visible social agenda. Social intrapreneurs work from within companies to advocate social programming that addresses social or environmental challenges. Companies that illustrate this category might include Timberland, Starbucks, Microsoft. A second driving force behind CSR acceptance has been global growth, and particularly in emerging economies. There has been a growing acceptance and interest in CSR across the globe. In Europe, the growth of CSR interest and programming over the past decade or more has clearly exceeded the interest anywhere in the world. A third driving force behind CSR stability has been academic proliferation. In addition to business acceptance, the academic approval and proliferation of research and publishing on the subject of CSR has been growing rapidly. The books, articles, and blogs are abundant. In the most probable future scenario for CSR, Carroll foresees an increase in stakeholder engagement, prevalence and power of ethically sensitive consumers, the level of sophistication of non-governmental organizations, employees as a CSR driving force, along with increased CSR activity up, down, and across the global supply chain. So we have reached the end of the presentation. We want to thank you for taking the time to listen to us, and if there are any questions, we would be more than glad to answer them for you. Thank you and goodbye.